How's it going, YouTube? Clinton today with another video, and today, guys, the brand new is going to be getting an invite. Now, sorry guys for the lack of videos. I have tonsillitis right now, which does suck and it makes it hard to talk. I do have my meds going right now, so I feel good enough to get up and make a video. I also just had appendicitis, so, you know, great things come in pairs. But I do want to talk about getting an invite because I feel like this has been the #1 topic that I've heard from people needing feedback on how to get their invite. And I really want to break it down with my first place deck list here from the OTS Championship and talk about how you can get an invite from regionals, from OTS Championships, the things that you should focus on, and the things that you're overthinking 100%. Definitely go ahead and check out all my sponsors down below in the description. But today we're going to be going through my deck list and just kind of talking about the things that I feel like are the most important when it comes to making your deck list. And the #1 thing for me too is that if you go to an event and you want to have fun and bring a fun deck, then do so. You know, have a great time. But you shouldn't bring something that's going to put you in a situation of an uphill battle, right? So if you bring Striker, you're going to have a bad time because unless you play like more than perfect, you're realistically not going to be able to perform. Whereas a deck like Malice or Ryzeal or even like Memento can kind of carry you through bad situations just because the engine is better. And I feel like that's something where a lot of people still haven't figured that one out yet, which is fine. But, you know, there's another thing to say that a lot of people can't afford decks like this, and there are other decks you can play, and there's ways to put yourself ahead. And one of the ways that you can put yourself ahead is playing like some kind of floodgate that just matters, right? So like I still play D-Shifter. I know some people put it in the side. Some people play like the Fiendsmith variant. I like it in the main deck because, again, this game is at least somewhat luck-based. And if you see your Shifter, you have a 33% chance of absolutely just skill issuing someone by activating Shifter, right? And I feel like that's something where you kind of give yourself that edge in 40 cards, where some games you will just win because you drew this card. And if you can play things like the Protos package, like in Ritual Beast, then you should. Because again, that is going to be something else that is just going to win you games. Now, I didn't play a single Mulch Army in this list. I already got rid of mine because the reprints were coming up, so I don't own any. And so I'm just playing a ton of hand traps. Because again, you're going to an OTS championship or you're going to a regional. Realistically, at a big regional, you have to go like X3, which with any decent deck you should be able to do as long as you're putting in the practice. Because I feel like that's the other thing too, is people don't put in the time. Yu-Gi-Oh is like a muscle, and if you don't practice, you're not gonna get the result. Because there's so many unique interactions in this game that you really have to practice. And I know it sucks to be like, well, I'd rather go do all these other things. You got to realize that you can't just like snap your fingers and see results. It's not going to happen. Yu-Gi-Oh is one of those things where you build upon your theory, your knowledge, your rulings, and those are the things that will win you games. To kind of expand on hand traps too, I play a lot, so I'm just going to kind of fan them all out here and we'll talk about them. And this is because, again, you have one card starters, so you want to make sure that you have enough ways to make sure that your opponent's just not playing the game. And unfortunately, this is kind of where Yu-Gi-Oh's at right now, is that your opponent can't play the game, or else you probably just lose. At a mid-tier event, like a regional or a OTS championship, you have to understand that you are not going to play against decks that really scare you, right? So, like, let's say that you're absolutely terrified of Lab, and you're like, I'm going to main deck Bell because it beats Lab. Well, you're probably only going to play against like 0 to like 0.5 Lab, right? Because it's just not that popular right now. Like, if you play against it, it's a really low percentage that you actually see it. So I'm not going to build my deck around beating Lab. Well, what if you're worried about Flu? I'm not going to run into Flu, right? 0 to 0.5 again. Like, you could see it. It's very unlikely, but you could. Now, if we're talking about, like, Water just won the YCS, and Water has been very popular lately. Maybe you want to play Droll, right? So I took the concession of not playing Droll because I already play Shifter, and I could have sided the Droll too, but I guess I just really wasn't that worried about Water. I have a ton of hand traps, and like Shifter and Nibiru both answer that deck very well, If they open Minstrel, then it just kind of feels bad. But this hand trap lineup felt amazing for me. It was something that always came up. Everything felt stellar. A lot of people were always asking if Rock is that good, but it really is. Because you got to remember, the second people tell you that Rock's bad, it's amazing. And the second that people are like, it's amazing, it's bad, which makes it good again, it's almost always correct to just play Rock because it's going to catch someone off guard. It's a very strong card. And a lot of times you don't have to drop it right away too. You can also like make your own board and then like rock your own board because most decks right now will have some kind of follow-up. So you can just like rock your own board and their board after you interact everything. And then you go back to your turn and you just start playing again. So I think rock is really important. And I feel like a lot of people don't really use it as they should, where sometimes it's even better just to hold for like a later situation and cut them off of like their last bit of follow-up versus like just blowing out their board immediately unless you like need to, right? Because if you have other ways of doing it, then you don't necessarily have to drop this, but it's just such a good card. Overall though, picking your hand trap lineup is really important going into getting your invite because you should be expecting your most popular matches, right? I'm looking for Memento, Ryzeal, Blue Eyes, Malice, and this lineup really does answer a lot of that. And that's something where having the best lineup for you going into your event will just carry you forward. Again, sometimes you just draw Shifter. Sometimes you draw like Ash Nib or Ash Imperm or Imperm Impulse together, and you just feel like you can't lose. So you should always put a lot of time and effort into studying the format or watching videos that will talk about the format. But, you know, there is a lot to say about your deck building is probably what cost you the loss. Sometimes it's not your gameplay. And that's something where a lot of times I would walk out of a tournament and be like, yeah, there's nothing I could have done. This and this happened. But a lot of times you could have, and it was just before the tournament, and it has everything to do with your deck building. So the next thing here is going to be the Malice monster cards. So we have 3 Dormouse, we have 3 White Rabbit, we have 2 of the Chessy Cat, we have 3 of the Field Spell, and 1 Terraforming. I just want to play as many ways as possible to be able to see Engine. I don't play 3 Chessy because this is something where if you play 3, it doesn't do anything on its own. And if you play too much Engine, then your whole hand's Engine, and you just don't have outs for things like Detonator. So I have to play a ton of hand traps and other things just to make sure that I don't lose to things like that, which is perfectly fine. I feel like this has always been okay as an Engine. Sometimes you can brick, but like your hand traps are so strong that like you usually can sustain a turn or 2 before you're like really in trouble. And that never really came up for me too much where I was too worried about it, but this has always been fine. The other thing too is following like a standard is fine, and you can play a standard list because they've done well. But if you are going to get your invite and you're just like net decking a list and you don't understand why certain cards are in that list, you probably shouldn't be playing those certain cards, because you should only play the cards that make sense to you. And if you don't know if it makes sense, that means you haven't play tested it enough, and that means that you're probably doomed from the start. One of the things in Malice that I still find very correct is playing the Dotscaper. This is something where a lot of people will swear up and down and be like, oh, you're bad or you're behind because you're playing Dotscaper. I feel like that's just ignorant, because if you can make a card make sense and it performs for you and it does well because your lines revolve around certain cards, then play the card. And don't ever feel weird because someone tells you not to do something. I think Dotscaper is great. This card came up in so many games. Love this card. I'm still going to play this card. It's like when I was playing Night Sword Serpent in Tier. Everyone's like, why are you playing that card? This is kind of like my Night Sword Serpent, and I like this card a lot. I think it's very cool. But Dotscaper is a card that I still think is correct, and it's because I made sense in my deck list, right? 3 Allure and then 1 Goldsark. I want to cut down on one of these for a 4th Bestial, but I don't know. I kind of like having this. These cards all get sided out games 2 and 3, just because I'm already worried about Lancia, so I would want to lose harder to Lancia. And we'll talk about the siding patterns and things that are important when you're looking for an invite, because again, you at a bigger event could just go X3 and still get it. Now, you don't really want to think like that. You want to do well. You want to go at least X2, right, to really be comfortable in getting your invite. But that's something where you want to make sure that you're very conscious about your outs in the format. So if you're worried about Lancia, then why keep these cards in when you auto fold to that card, and these won't help you in that situation. So these usually get sided out for me. But as for game one, they let you draw into a lot of hand traps, play through a board, into a board. This deck is very important as far as winning game one, because if you lose game one and then you get Lancia in game two or game three, it's probably wraps. So this is the strongest game one deck for a reason, and that's why you play things like Allure and Goldsark, because again, we already understand that the main weakness to this deck is Chaos Hunter and Lancia, mostly Lancia. So you want to make sure that you have answers. Talking about answers, I do have one talent in the main, and I have one called by in the main. Again, just answers Lancia, answers other things, and then this is just good for punishing like detonators or hand traps wherever your opponent wants to throw them, and then one of each trap. I played 40 cards because you want to be able to see everything in your deck. If you're playing a lot of bricks, then there is room to go over 40. But if you want to be able to see your cards like Shifter the most optimally, you want to make sure that you are playing 40 so you have the best chance of seeing them. That gives me the best chance of seeing my combinations of hand traps. I always say if you have Ash Imperium, you probably live that turn because it's really hard for most decks to play through these two in most scenarios. If I open like these two together, I feel really good. If I open like these two together, it feels really good. So that's one thing where you want to play less cards because you want to make sure that you see all those combinations as much as possible. Now, as for the extra deck, this is something where I talked about again, you have to make things make sense for you. So if you go into cards a lot more than other cards that you're told to go into, then maybe it just makes more sense to play the cards that you're familiar with and the cards that really do make sense to your own gameplay. So for me, I'm still playing Teraherb. I think that there's enough decks out there right now where having the Disabler to stop like a talent is really impactful. We're seeing a lot more Lightning Storm and a lot more Duster now. So this is a really good meta call right now because of the fact that we're seeing so much blowout. And that's another thing too, is when you go to these events, having that kind of info to know that those things are getting popular, it really can do you wonders, because you can do certain texts like this where you're just like, okay, like I have an answer for it. Dope, right? Like that's super cool. Bestials are still around, sure, but at the same time, it's not just this, right? Like your board is still much larger than that. So that's one thing that I feel really good about too. A card that I really do like. So there's a couple Link 4s here. The only one here I don't like is a Bow, and I actually want to trade it out for like Heat Soul. There's surprisingly a lot of ways to get the Heat Soul right now through Lancia, which is really nice because you play so many hand traps, so at that point you can at least have an answer to Lancia by hand trapping your opponent. Another thing too is playing Shifter is also really impactful for that because of the fact that it lasts 2 turns. So if they Lancia you, you can just go ahead and Shifter them after. And then your opponent is just kind of not doing anything in their turn, comes back to you, and you just hope they don't have the second Lancia, right? So this is another thing where sometimes your tech choices and things that you add in don't always pan out the way that they are, but you shouldn't be mad at yourself either for that. A lot of times you kind of have to just take that with you into the next event and then realize in your testing like what comes up and what doesn't, and what feels more like a force card to play and what doesn't. For me, I was really pilled on just playing a Bow because I was like, oh, it's like going to be really solid. But in my opinion, it's only really good if you're playing like the Fiendsmith build, whereas for me, it wasn't really that impactful. So mostly it was just these two. I summoned this like twice. I summoned this like 4 times. So that's one thing where you kind of want to like keep track of what you're summoning the most, because a lot of times too, you can make some nice tech options going into your next event. Back to just playing 1/1/1. I was on 2 binder for a little bit, but 1/1/1 is fine. SP, Dark Charmer, Cerberus. Cerberus is Out Chaos Hunter. It also is your Fiend to get into your Bow, but I'm cutting the Bow. But at the same time, I'd still play this because it outs the Chaos Hunter. Dark Charmer is really solid because, again, it leads into SP plays. It can lead into like access code plays. In the mirror match, you can reborn your opponent's Dormouses and what have you too, which is already broken. And then SP is just SP. Haggard, Splash, Link Decoder, and Link Spider. I don't believe in Lingering Bow. I don't think it's that good. Just like a really odd utility card that I don't really feel like is ever really needed. You have these two though, which is fine. This is just for like the rock play, right, which is fine. And then Link Decoder. But everything else here is like pretty standard as far as like what people are used to playing. The Abow for me again is probably getting cut. But these are like the considerations you got to make when going into an event that I think are really important. Now let me show you what will make or break your invite. And that is the most important thing. And that is the side deck. So we already know Lancia is like 96% in that many decks in the format, which is insane. Lancia is absolutely everywhere. So you want to make sure that you have a playset of Lancia that is the largest trend, and you honestly won't regret having it. This card answers Malice, which, again, Malice is very scary to play against. So you want to make sure that you have an answer, is very strong. And, you know, if the meta shifts and we start seeing more like fusion decks, we can go back to D-Barrier, but even everyone's off that now. Like, it's not that popular anymore. Lancia answers quite a lot though, which is really cool, and Malice also had the most representation of the top card of the YCS, so that's another reason to just kind of be more so on playing this card. You can also play Chaos Hunters if you want to, but that's really up to you. Understanding top trends and seeing things like Blue Eyes everywhere, I feel like cards like Ogre are really strong. I talked about this in my post, the fact that this card won me at least 5 games, and this is the best tech option I could have asked for this weekend. Being able to hit the Mausoleum of White, if your opponent doesn't have a Spirit on board, you can always Ogre the True Light when they activate it. The Ogre comes up against things like a Bow. If they use the effect, you can Ogre it. It will resolve without effect. There's so many situations where Ogre is like actually so crazy, and I just feel like it's so necessary right now that you only want to play 2 of it. You don't want to play 3 because it is a hard once per turn, and you just don't want to see too many once per turns in your hand. I would say the other thing is really understanding your weaknesses going into an event. So I already understand that the worst things that can happen to me are getting Chaos Huntered or getting the Lancia dropped on me. So I already have Call By in the main deck, and I side into 3 Crossout, and I really feel like Crossout is just really unnecessary at all times, except when it's just absolutely crucial that you stop 1 card because it stops your entire playline. That's where this is really good for Lancia. It's the same way that I played this for Shifter and Tier, and it is nice when you play the mirror match, because the mirror match is already really difficult, so you have a Crossout for Engine in the mirror, which is really nice. And then you side into your 2 other talents, so you have 3. So if they drop Chaos Hunter on you, you just steal it. So it's something where you don't have to even make the Cerberus, which is really nice. Because then you just use it as a link material, make Haggard, banish your monster. It's really fun. It's really nice. But this is something that you kind of have to realize that is your biggest choke point, and you have to focus on that. Because especially if it's really popular, like everyone's playing Lancia in the format, then you need an answer to it. If not everyone's on Lancia and it's really rare to see, then I would not be playing these at all, right? Because then these wouldn't even be that relevant. I'd probably just play one in the main deck, and these would be other tech options for the format. So a lot of times, too, it depends. Like, if I'm going second into a board, I won't even put in the Crossout unless it's the mirror match, because you need to open as many playable cards as possible going into their board. And I'm already playing so many hand traps. A lot of times I'll just side in, like, the talents, the ogres, and I believe some other things that you'll see too. But it really does just depend on what I'm playing against and what the matchup looks like. We are starting to see a lot more of the blowouts happening in the format too. These are becoming very popular. They are the best board break right now. I said this in my last video too about board breaks, is that these cards were gaining a lot of traction. I feel like we've hit the critical mass now where these cards are like the best ones, right? So they are really solid. I did end up dustering my opponent for 2 Shadow Imprisoning Mirrors. I like top deck Duster. It was my 6th card. And then I did crash my monster, my Red Ransom, into my opponent's Chaos Hunter. And then I Lightning Storm called back row. I blew up their True Light. It blew up their board, including the Chaos Hunter. I activated Malice and Underground, full comboed. It was kind of gross. But these cards are very strong right now, and I still feel like you should play them. I only play 1-in-1. Space is very limited, especially when you're looking at a competitive meta right now. There's so many things you got to keep track of, and especially in a deck like this where you really have to answer something, you have even less space, right? So that's why I play so many hand traps in the main deck, because sometimes when you got a side small, you still have a lot of opportunity to win the next game. And that's another thing too, where like even if you do get Lancea, if you have like a nib and you have like a solemn strike, I feel like you just can't lose, right? Because your opponent's already put at like such a weird spot where you're just basically blowing up their whole board, and when they try to do like the recovery play, you just solemn strike them, and it's just like, wow, pass turn. And these are things that you really got to consider going into getting your invite. I know that it can be really difficult, and it can be really daunting, but at the same time, if you go to locals a lot and you're really familiar with like the things that you're playing against and you feel really comfortable, you kind of just have to look at regionals as like a really big local, because everyone there is somebody's local player, right? And that doesn't mean that they're any better or any worse than you. That's just something where you kind of have to treat every single round like round one, and we don't lose round one, and we also just don't lose locals, right? So every single round that you play against, you're just playing against somebody else from another local. And I feel like that's a really big way of changing your thinking, because when you go somewhere, and I've had this said to me before too, and it's kind of unsettling, where like you sit down and people are like, well, I already lost. Like, you're the better player. Don't ever say that, because you're already losing the second that you say that, right? Like, it's so bad. Like, if you go to regional and that's your level of confidence, you're not going to get the results that you want. So you kind of have to have that winner's mentality where like, and not like really cocky, but at the same time, you kind of have to walk in and be like, listen, I know what my deck does. I know what the top meta decks do. If I run into a rogue deck, I'll figure out what it does on the fly, and then I'll do my best against it, right? Like, these are the thoughts that you should have in your head. And I know some people are more so on the side of like, well, maybe I just won't go, because if I go, then like, what if I lose? You only really know by going, right? And everyone is going to, at some point, just get past that line of being just a local player and start doing better. And I want that for everyone. I want everyone to start just doing better. And so the first thing I would say when you're trying to get your invite is change your line of thinking, because I feel like that's the first place where there's a huge disconnect right now. Because a lot of people go into an event and they'll just overthink it so hard because they're just so nervous to get their invite. And, that's something where even if I go to like a regional, I'm always at least getting an invite, right? And that's something where you can get there too, but you just kind of have to be confident when you sit down and understand that like you have put in the time and you understand what you were doing. So you are going to make sure that your plays are accurate. You're going to think through your lines. You're going to hand trap just like the where to hand trap videos taught you, and you're going to do well. You're going to be fine. And, I hope that brings you some kind of solace, because I know a lot of you are trying really hard right now, and I really do commend that. I think that's awesome. Once you get your invite, you're just going to want to top events. It's just how it goes. And the first time you get your invite, and I remember my first invite, it felt amazing. And I know that you guys can get there too, but just make sure that you really put the time and the effort into the studying and into your deck list. Because at the end of the day, if you ever say that something was out of your control, it might have just been a deck building issue. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of it comes down to. There's a lot of like technical play and stuff that does go wrong, and people overthink things or go too fast, and you need to take that extra second to like really analyze the field, the graveyards, the hand, and just make sure that you're doing the right play. But overall, focus on your technical play, really work on your deck list, make sure everything makes sense. Like, I have a reason behind everything that I'm playing. You should also have a reason behind everything that you're playing. And, run it by some people. See what their thoughts are. I'm always saying to people that you shouldn't just be closed-minded. Like, if someone tells you that I should be playing, like, Grand Mole in my list, I'm going to ask why, right? Like, I'm still going to be like, what are you talking about? But maybe it's a really cool tech in the format and we just don't see it, right? So that's something where listen to your peers, really think through your deck list before an event, and make sure that you're playing the cards that you want to play, because you're just going to not do well if you don't know what you're playing, and then feel like you should have played the other thing anyway. And last but not least, have fun with it, but also make sure you get a good night's sleep. You go in there with some good food, and you just try to focus every single round like it's round one. I hope this video helped you out. I hope to be back to myself soon. I've been sick way too much lately, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video. Thank you.